Viking life is usually imagined as raiding, but most Viking families spent far more time on ordinary survival than on longships. The stereotype goes like this. Every Viking household revolved around war, raids, and non-stop heroic violence. But the people actually living through it were usually focused on food, work, warmth, status, and getting through the next few hours. If you followed an ordinary person from the moment the day began to the moment it ended, the biggest surprise would not be how exotic everything looked. It would be how structured life already was, even without the tools we now treat as basic. So rather than treating this as costume history, let us walk through the day the way a regular person would have actually experienced it. There was usually no soft landing into the morning. Morning in a Viking longhouse began with smoke, animals, and immediate chores. Embers were checked, bedding was cleared, and both people and livestock had to be managed in a shared environment that was useful, but not especially fresh. The household was a working machine, and the morning made that obvious before anyone even stepped fully outside. In practical terms, the morning was about stabilizing the day before it could unravel. The first hour often decided whether the rest of the day would feel manageable or chaotic. Moments like this also carried quiet decision-making. People were constantly judging effort, risk, timing, and whether the household could absorb one more problem. This is exactly where the era comes back to human scale. The famous headlines stayed far away, while regular bodies handled the actual burden of the day. That was when routine turned into sustained labor. The day's work depended on season more than on fantasy. People milked animals, repaired tools, processed wool, cut hay, checked boats, or handled food and storage. Men and women often had different expected roles, but a real household still required flexibility because bad weather, shortages, or absent family members could push anyone into tasks that simply had to be done. There was rarely a clean split between home life and productive labor. This was the sort of work that held a life together even when nobody wrote it down as history. This is exactly where the era comes back to human scale. The famous headlines stayed far away while regular bodies handled the actual burden of the day. What looked small from a distance often decided whether the rest of the day felt manageable. That is why ordinary routines deserve more attention than the stereotype usually gives them. This is one of the places where modern assumptions usually fall apart. Food was based on what a family could reliably produce, preserve, or catch. Dairy, fish, barley, meat when available, and stored foods mattered far more than grand feasting most days. Scarcity was seasonal, so a good household was not the one that looked dramatic. It was the one that kept enough food, cloth, and repair capacity to survive the dark months. Knowledge of materials, seasons, and timing sat underneath these routines. The ordinary version is often more revealing than the dramatic one. What looks small from a distance often decided whether the rest of the day felt manageable. That is why ordinary routines deserve more attention than the stereotype usually gives them. Seen up close, store enough was not just a visual detail. It shaped mood, behavior, and the amount of strain people had to absorb before the day was done. Later in the day, the physical side of life became harder to ignore. Viking life was physically rough, but not always in the lazy stereotype way. Wool layers, damp conditions, lice, smoke, and cold shaped the body. Yet Norse people also cared about grooming, more than pop culture often admits. That contrast matters because a hard life did not cancel out standards of cleanliness, pride, or personal presentation. The physical environment kept pressing on every decision. The body absorbed the price of daily life more directly than most people today are used to. Seen up close, hard but proud, was not just a visual detail. It shaped mood, behavior, and the amount of strain people had to absorb before the day was done. That is why details like wool, smoke, and grooming mattered so much. They were part of the real pressure of the day, not decorative backgrounds somebody could safely ignore. The routine also carried rules that had nothing to do with efficiency and everything to do with society. Kinship and honor structured everyday behavior. Marriage arrangements, property questions, local assemblies, and remembered slights all had consequences beyond one day's chores. A family could not treat social reputation as optional because help, protection, and future alliances often depended on how the household was seen by others. Social order showed up in tiny moments, not just in laws and ceremonies. That social pressure could be just as exhausting as the work itself. That is why details like family honor and kin ties mattered so much. They were part of the real pressure of the day, not decorative backgrounds somebody could safely ignore. As daylight faded, the household routine revealed what this world really demanded. Evening returned people to the longhouse for craft work, meals, talk, and planning. During long winters especially, story and memory mattered because they helped carry identity through hard time indoors. Viking family life makes more sense once you stop looking only at ships and start looking at the fire, the loom, the animals, and the people trying to hold one household together. Nightfall did not erase the workload. It simply changed its shape. Evening did not erase the day's pressure, but it made the structure of that world impossible to miss. If you slow the scene down, the routine becomes easier to read. Most people were not performing for history. They were trying to keep ordinary life from slipping out of control. When you put those pieces together, what family life actually looked like in a Viking household stops looking like a staged history scene and starts reading like a real human routine. For most families, Viking life meant work, kinship, weather, and practical routines that had to hold together through long seasons. That is the value of everyday history. It shows what people carried, tolerated, fixed, feared, and repeated when nobody was watching. Seen at ground level, the period feels less like a museum label and more like a lived-in routine,